A single female rabbit can produce more than 40 offspring in a year on nothing but hay, vegetable scraps, and a wooden hutch the size of a nightstand. No pasture, no pond, no barn required. Gram for gram, her meat beats beef, chicken, and pork on protein, and beats all three on fat content, too. She converts feed into meat at roughly 4-to-1. A cow needs about 8-to-1 for the same result. Twice the feed for the same amount of meat on the table. By nearly every number that actually matters, rabbit should be sitting in your fridge right now, today, not as a novelty item. It almost certainly isn't, and the reason isn't one thing. It's 5 separate things, and they all happen to gang up on the exact same animal. Here's why that math actually matters before we get into why it failed. The FAO ranked rabbit among the most feed-efficient land animals on the planet in 2013, behind only broiler chickens. One breeding pair in a backyard hutch for a year can outproduce a full-grown steer that ate 3,000 pounds of grain over 18 months. And yet American rabbit consumption sits under half a pound per person annually, while chicken alone runs past 100 pounds. Stick with me, because the story of how that gap got that wide involves a monk, a virus deliberately released as a weapon, and a cartoon rabbit that quietly did more damage to the meat industry than any regulation ever did. Start 2,000 years back with the Romans. They found the Iberian Peninsula so thick with wild rabbits that some historians think the name Hispania itself may come from a Phoenician phrase meaning land of rabbits. Rome built walled enclosures called lepararia to farm them, prized specifically because nothing bred faster on so little feed. But the habit that actually locked rabbit into European diets for centuries came later, from an unlikely source. Sometime around the early medieval period, a loophole emerged in Catholic Lent fasting rules, one that some historians trace back to Pope Gregory the Great. Newborn rabbit kits, born blind, hairless, and helpless, got reclassified as something closer to fish than meat. Whether that was ever a formal ruling or just a convenient interpretation nobody wanted to challenge is still debated. What isn't debated is what happened next. French monasteries turned rabbit breeding into an industrial-scale operation, managing underground warrens with the same precision a modern farm applies to a field. Rabbit became the meat that was technically not meat, and it stayed a European staple for close to 2,000 years on the strength of that one theological shortcut. So if the biology and the history both point toward rabbit dominating the modern menu, something had to break that chain. And the first break came from inside the meat itself. In 1928, Arctic explorer Vilhjálmur Stephenson documented something he called rabbit starvation. When trappers were forced to survive on nothing but lean rabbit meat, they didn't just lose weight. They grew violently ill, developing diarrhea, headaches, and a hunger that never eased no matter how much they ate. The issue wasn't calories. Wild rabbit meat carries almost no fat, and the human liver has a hard ceiling on how much pure protein it can process before ammonia starts building up faster than the kidneys can clear it. You can genuinely be full and slowly deteriorating at the same time. No traditional culture that relied on rabbit ever relied on it alone. It was always eaten with fat, lard, marrow, seal blubber, bread, and butter because the meat itself carries a built-in limit on how central it can ever become to a diet. That limitation alone might have been manageable with the right side dish. The next problem couldn't be solved with any dish at all. Rabbits are prey animals down to the cellular level, and that fact makes them almost impossible to farm at industrial scale. Their stress response is calibrated for a world where every startle could be fatal, and in a rabbit, that calibration is literal. A loud noise, an unfamiliar scent, a sudden hand in the cage can trigger cardiac arrest on the spot. The European Food Safety Authority confirmed in 2020 that stress-induced mortality is a genuine ongoing problem in commercial rabbit farming in exactly the kind of environment, constant machinery, lighting cycles, dense housing that chickens shrug off without issue. And then there's disease, which is where this story turns genuinely strange because the worst chapter didn't happen on a farm at all. It happened on an entire continent. In 1859, a British settler named Thomas Austin released 24 rabbits onto his Australian estate purely to have something to hunt on weekends, reportedly telling friends it could do little harm. With no natural predators on the entire continent and year-round breeding conditions, those 24 animals became an estimated 10 billion rabbits within 7 decades, stripping vegetation bare across across millions of acres and pushing native species toward extinction. Australia tried shooting campaigns, bounties for rabbit ears, poison laced with strychnine, and a rabbit-proof fence stretching over 1,000 miles, roughly the distance from New York to Miami. The rabbits went around it and burrowed under it. In 1950, scientists deliberately released the myxoma virus into the wild population along the Murray River Basin. The first wave killed 99.8% of infected rabbits, lesions, and fever, taking most of them within 2 weeks. Within 2 years, the population crashed from roughly 600 million to about 100 million, and then something remarkable happened. The tiny fraction that survived carried genuine genetic resistance, passed it on, and within less than a decade, the mortality rate among infected rabbits had dropped to around 25%. Natural selection running in fast motion in front of researchers' own eyes. Australia deployed a second virus in 1996, rabbit hemorrhagic disease, after it escaped a quarantine facility under circumstances that were never fully explained. It killed rabbits so fast some collapsed mid-stride in open fields before symptoms even had time to show. For anyone anywhere in the world considering commercial rabbit farming afterward, that virus became a permanent, essentially uninsurable risk. A single undetected outbreak can wipe out an entire breeding stock in under 2 days, and multiple insurers simply stopped covering rabbit operations entirely after watching it happen firsthand. So the biology fought rabbit, and the disease risk fought rabbit, and you'd think that alone would explain the empty shelf. It doesn't. The last reason has nothing to do with farming at all, and it's the strangest one on the list. Before World War II, rabbit was ordinary kitchen food across America and Britain, nothing remarkable about it at all, and both governments actively promoted backyard rabbit raising during the war itself as a practical contribution to the food supply. Then, in the post-war decades, something shifted quietly and completely. The pet industry exploded through the consumer boom of the 1950s and 60s, and children's culture reclassified the rabbit almost entirely, layer by layer. Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit, Disney's Thumper and Bambi, the Velveteen Rabbit, an expanding commercial Easter Bunny tradition, all stacked onto an animal that already had exactly the physical traits ethologists call baby schema: big eyes, a round face, soft fur, the same triggers that make a human infant or a puppy feel instinctively precious rather than edible. The chicken never made that jump into the companion category. The pig, despite being measurably smarter and just as available as a backyard animal, never made it either. By the 1980s, grocery stores stocking whole rabbit found customers visibly recoiling at the display case, and the product simply vanished from shelves within a single generation, taking 2,000 years of continuous European tradition down with it in the English-speaking world specifically. None of this happened in France, where rabbit sits in the meat case next to chicken without controversy, and the country eats roughly 70,000 metric tons of it a year. It didn't happen in Spain, where rabbit is a required ingredient in real Valencian paella, or in Sichuan province, which produces close to 40% of the world's rabbit meat and sells spicy braised rabbit heads as casual street food the way American vendors sell hot dogs. Same biology, same liver, same protein, completely different classification, installed by culture rather than nutrition, and once installed, nearly impossible to undo. So the animal that can outproduce a steer from a hutch smaller than a washing machine that requires a fraction of the land and water and produces almost no methane is still sitting almost entirely outside the Western food system, not because the math ever stopped working, but because a monk's loophole, a lean cut of meat, a released virus, and a cartoon rabbit all happened to land on the same species within a few centuries of each other. If an animal this efficient still couldn't win against a children's book character, what do you think it would actually take to fix the American food system at this point?